I'm here to tell you that storytelling in landscape photography simply doesn't exist. I'm sure that you've heard countless photographers here on YouTube, photographers in real life, and perhaps even photography teachers tell you that you have to tell stories with your images. And that includes landscape photography images. Learning how to tell stories, or in the case of landscape photography, how to evoke emotions, is absolutely crucial in your work as a photographer. Look at this image right here. This is a photograph of Cho'oyo, one of the world's 8,000-meter mountains. I captured this photograph in Nepal in 2019 whilst leading a workshop together with Thomas Heaton. And seeing this image, looking at it right now, okay, it's a nice image, right? But what's the story? What is the story of this image? Think about it. And hold that thought, because we're going to circle back to this image towards the end of this little lecture here, and I'm going to make some really important points about it. I'm now going to show you 6 carefully selected photographs. All 6 of them belong to perhaps some of the most famous photographs ever taken. Let's start here with this image. This is an image by Sam Sher. It's the crash of the Hindenburg, 1937. I think all of us, one way or another in life, has seen this image. What is this photograph about? What's the story here? Of course, looking at it, I can immediately see a story. And having given this presentation to literally hundreds of photographers, I know what the top 3 answers is. People will say, well, it's about a burning airship. It's about the crash of the Hindenburg. It is a story about human failure. These are some of the things I hear every time. Moving on to my next image. We now have an iconic image by Neil Leifer, 1965. We have Muhammad Ali versus Sonny Liston, and it's at that moment when Sonny Liston hits the ground. Asking workshop participant, what is this image about? What is the story? Well, all of them always says, well, it's about winning. It's about Muhammad Ali besting Sonny Liston. It is about victory. And when I ask them, what do they feel when they look at this image? They say they feel victorious, they feel strong, they feel powerful. Some people have also said that they feel a little bit frightened by the image, by the look and the intensity in Muhammad Ali's face. Continuing with the images, we're now looking at an image from 1965 by a Swedish photographer, Lennart Nilsson. This one was published in Time magazine initially, if I'm not misremembering. It's of a fetus. The image is of a fetus 18 weeks old. And when this image was published, it was the first time we could visualize what it was like inside the belly at 18 weeks. If you ask a human being, what is this image about? It is about the creation of life. It is about an infant growing. It is about humanity, evolution. The story that is portrayed in this one image of this fetus is manifold, and I think everyone has a slightly different interpretation. And if we ask what the feeling we feel seeing this image, it's quite often wonder. It's awe of life. It's love, perhaps. Or for the people that actually know that this is a photograph of a miscarried fetus at 18 weeks, it might be sadness, sorrow, and despair. So it's a powerful image that has a powerful story and that conveys and evokes powerful emotions in us humans. Continuing on, John Domini's 1968, the Black Power Salute, the Mexico City Olympic Games. Asking almost any human on the planet what this is about will say that it's about black empowerment. They will say it's about liberation, it's about human rights, it's about everyone having the right to be free. And the emotions that it evokes can be rage, it can be anger, it can be despair, right? But the story is super clear and the emotions equally so, right? Continuing on, Karen Lunny, 2013. She's labeled this image Dante's Inferno. I think it's a phenomenal wildlife portrait of a very chaotic scene. It's from the Serengeti Mara. What really catches me is the eye of that central wildebeest. You can see the fear in the eye of that animal. I see the fear. I immediately create a story around this image in my head. Perhaps it's just a great migration and they are just crossing water and it's chaotic. But I'd like to think that perhaps there is a croc in the water or a lion just off camera chasing these wildebeest into the water, because there's a real inferno happening in this image. I see a story in this image, and I, as a person, relate to the animal, and I see emotions. I see fear, terror. So not just for me, but for all workshop participants I've ever had, the story and the emotions in this image is absolutely clear. Let's now look at a final example of my 6 images. This is 99 Cent by Andreas Gursky, published in 1999. When it was first printed and sold, it was the most expensive print ever sold at auction. Of course, it has been surpassed today with other prints, but at the time, this was the most expensive photograph in the world. I love this photograph. I think it's a masterpiece. What's the story, though? What is the story from this image? Well, it's about human consumption. It is about endless choices. It is about over-consumerism, at least for me. I love the composition. I love the colors. I love how this image really portrays humanity as it is today, perhaps. What is the emotions you feel? Well, I feel despair, because we do not need, what could this be, 100 different types of chocolates in the foreground here? We don't need that many choices, and the planet is paying for those choices, so I feel despair. Someone else might feel something different, but for everyone that I've ever shown this to on a photography workshop, the story has been the same. It is about consumerism. Masterfully done. Beautiful image, right? Let me now show you something completely different. This is a photograph of mine, taken in the Scottish Highlands a couple of years ago when I was up trekking. What's the story here? And I'm going to give you a few seconds now to think about that. I can almost hear the sound of crickets. There is no story. Every time, on every workshop, for the hundreds of participants that I've shown this image, I get the same answer. There's no story. So then I ask the participants in my workshops, what does this image make you feel? Some of them will say peaceful, but of course a lot of them will say, well, it's not a particularly good image. And it's not, because it's only half an image. Look at it now. All of a sudden we have this beautiful blue and red building on the right. Immediately the stories, the questions come crashing from the participants in the workshops. What is in that building? How long has it stood there? What is it for? Who lives there? You know, the questions can be many and varied. For me, I wondered the same thing when I was there and I looked in through that window. There is indeed a boat inside, and it is a boathouse, and the boat is fairly modern, so they're using it for fishing on the little lock. So what does this prove? Well, it proves as soon as we put that little boathouse in there, there was a story. But without that boathouse, the photograph did not have a story. Let us define landscape photography. Basically, landscape photography is photography of natural features of land, sky, and waters, without or with only limited inclusion of animals, man-made objects, or humans. These 3 things tell stories. Landscapes do not. Landscapes evoke emotions. Let's take an example. This is one of my images from north of Sweden, Arctic Sweden, photographed in Stora Reidavagi in 2018. There is no humans, no man-made objects, and no wildlife. So, is there a story here? I could fake a story. I could invent a story and say that this is a story about the changing seasons, about the annual snow depths and the shrinking glaciers and something like this. But that's me forcing a story onto the photograph. The photographs, at the first glance, does not have a story. But if you ask me what I feel, the answer is peaceful, light, relaxed. And these were the emotions that I were going for when I edited this image. These were also the emotions that I felt when I photographed the image. Let's look at this rainforest scene photographed in the Choco rainforest in Ecuador in 2018 of a log crossing the water. What's the story here? You might force a story on the image and say, well, it's a story of how a tree has fallen down and now crosses the river and whatnot. For me, this image, again, it provides a sense of peace, tranquility. It grounds me with the natural world. It inspires me to go out and explore places like this. But there is no story here. Not without human intervention or wildlife. How about this image then? This is a photograph from the Lofoten Islands. I took this one in 2020. You can see the majestic mountains, and at the very, very base of these mountains is a human settlement. We have small street lights lighting up the scene at the bottom. There's a little church down there to the right. What is the story here? My workshop participants, they usually say something. It shows the story of how harsh life can be in the Arctic. How small the human can be faced with the mountains. It shows human fragility. You know, stories like this, and all of them, of course, could be true. And if you ask them what they feel about it, well, typically I get from my participants that, well, it makes us feel in awe of the mountain. Feel that nature is so big and powerful. Feel that we are fragile, and emotions like this, right? Let's now circle back to that very first photograph of the Cho'oyo that I showed you in the beginning. What if I were to tell you that it's actually only part of an image, and revealing the rest of the image, we see this. In the foreground of this image, we actually have two small Nepalese settlements. How does that change the way you see this image? Is there only emotions, or is there perhaps also a story? How remote is this place? Who lives there? How high are we actually? These questions start to unfold a story, a narrative in this image that, being a pure landscape photograph, does not exist. With the inclusion of humans, man-made objects or animals, photographs, they tell stories and not just evoke emotions. My point here is really simple. Pure nature images do not tell stories, they evoke emotions. I'm not saying to anyone, do not include humans, man-made objects or animals in your photographs. Be aware that including these things, you move away from only evoking emotions to also tell stories. That's totally fine to do, of course, but we have to do it intentionally. The more decision we make as photographers, the more accountable we are for our own photography, the better our photography will be. For me, analyzing enough photographs to realize what I'm now teaching you guys came as a huge revelation. I no longer had to go out and try to tell stories. I could go out and try to evoke emotions. Instead of trying to record what story I was sharing with an image, I tried to sense inside of me, how do I feel today as I am taking this photograph? And then in my photograph and in my editing of said photograph, I would try to reflect those emotions. I would love to hear what you guys think about what I've said today. Do you agree with it? Is it true? Was there something that you didn't feel was right? Remember, all this is hugely subjective. There is no objective truth. This is art, and the way we see art can be different for many people. Thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned because there'll be a lot more teaching contents coming your way, and particularly teaching contents that allows us to think not only as nature photographers, but as conservation photographers as well, using our nature photography to inspire people to want to protect our beautiful but fragile world.